Hello, and welcome to this evening's webinar. I'm Dr. Tracy Steady Hardcastle, and I'm very excited to be here today with Dr. Adelia Sapp. And we are here today to talk about where emotions and genetics meet, and how they co-create situations that we may feel uh, more or less able to rectify. Things like anxiety or codependency, why sometimes people feel like they can't get their brains to stop thinking about things, or why they can't quite get to the next level that they want to get to in terms of their healing process. So welcome, Dr. Sapp. Before I introduce her more formally, I just want to encourage everyone to fill out the poll questions. We are here for you to give you the best of ourselves, and knowing what you know and what you want helps us to help you. So please do fill out those poll questions. And thank you for joining us tonight, Dr. Sapp.
It's a
Would you like to
pleasure to
introduce
be here.
yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of my favorite topics. Thank you so much for inviting me once again. Really great chatting with you earlier, Dr. Steady, hearing about your background. I am a former employee of the DNA company, now an associate. Mental health and genetics is one of my favorite topics. I have a clinical focus on functional medicine treatment of mental health conditions. And in Washington, we are privileged with a more sort of integrative model. So sometimes medication is needed. Other times, supplementation and lifestyle are the way to go. And I talk to people a lot about the biopsychosocial model. And I don't think that's more applicable anywhere than in codependency. So really interesting kind of learning all about that and hoping to serve people here better and give them some information. So, yeah, pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. And why don't you give us a bit of background on your background and for myself and the listeners.
I have a doctorate in acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine. And in that model, we don't separate out body and mind.
Mm.
So we had classes about that when I was in grad school, and subsequent to that, I became trained in trauma conscious transformational coaching and neurolinguistic programming. And so, really dealing with the where the emotions and the body meet is really sort of the something I've always found fascinating. So, thank you.
Fun. Yeah, thank you. So I think let's just start with some of the poll questions, if that sounds good to you. I don't know if they have been submitted in our audience. Yep, they have. Okay. So the first one is, how familiar are you with the idea that genetics can influence mood, stress, and resilience? So very familiar. Some people have studied this. 76% are somewhat familiar, and then some are not familiar at all. Um, and just as an aside to this, everyone in the audience, if they have done their genetic report and would like to pull up some in the mood and behavior section or from the mood and behavior report itself, we will be referencing the specific genes and the tie-ins to depression, anxiety, and codependency. So if you want to follow along with your genetic report, kind of that may help to see what your particular genetics are saying about your risk factors here.
And the app is really a fast way to kind of go back and forth between different reports and scroll through different genes. So, for those of you who haven't downloaded the app yet, I strongly encourage you to do so, because it's really a game changer when we're going to try and talk as slowly as we can, but sometimes we just get on a roll and you may need to switch from one gene to the next pretty quickly. So, the app is a great way to do that.
Good call. I need to download the app actually. So the next poll question is, when you think about anxiety, depression, or codependency, which do you believe plays a bigger role? Genetics. Okay, so 5% of people are saying it's primarily genetics. 15% are saying environment, including upbringing, relationships, and culture. 66% say both equally, and then 15% say not sure. Okay, so interesting. Um, have you ever had DNA testing done is the next question to learn about your health or emotional tendencies. So yes, specifically for mental health and stress was 10%. Yes, but for other health reasons was 61%. And then not yet, but I'm interested, 24%. And then no, and I'm not sure it's relevant. Okay. So I mean, our mood and behavior report and some of the genes like COMT, which doesn't just have relationships to mental health, it also affects your hormone metabolism, um, and detox. Are interesting because there is, when you look at the genes, it starts becoming more evident that there's that mind-body connection, that mental health isn't just in our heads, it's also in our bodies. Because we do have some hard wiring that gives us certain tendencies, especially in terms of temperament. I don't know if you found that, Dr. Steady. But in terms of outcomes, it's largely dependent on what we do about it. So, um, so which of these challenges you most identify with is the next one. So it looks like anxiety and overthinking is by far the biggest category there in terms of our audience. So that is definitely worth noting. So genes, a lot of the genes we'll be talking about, like COMT, can affect that a lot, especially for slow COMT in terms of overthinking. Um, 5-HTT-LPR, which affects serotonin transport, that one could play a part there. BDNF, ADRA2B, we'll get into the specifics later. Depression and lack of motivation is still a decent chunk of the audience. People pleasing and difficulty setting boundaries is 10%. Okay. And that often does relate to codependency, which we'll touch on. Burnout and exhaustion from overfunctioning is 17%. So still a decent amount of you. And then for the last poll question, any chance you want to go over this one, Dr. Steady?
Sure. If you could gain one insight from combining DNA testing with psychology, what would be the most valuable to you? 10% said understanding why I react the way that I do. 27% said learning personalized strategies to manage stress. 44% said breaking cycles of anxiety or depression. And 20% said improving relationships and boundaries. So thank you
Okay.
all for your participation in our poll. That does help us help you, and we really appreciate it.
Okay, great. So let's just dive in. So in
Okay.
terms of our content, it definitely looks like anxiety and overthinking in terms of our audience is a big topic. So we'll want to kind of circle back on that. But first, we were talking about high functioning codependency, and you have like a really good grasp on this concept. It seems like codependency was much more sort of popular in the 90s, and then it sort of made a comeback, but rebranded, if we can say that. So, would you be able to define high functioning codependency for us, Dr. Steady?
Absolutely. So, when a lot of people hear that term, they might think of someone who's struggling, maybe who can't function without their partner or is enabling addiction or disempowers their partner so they can feel good about themselves. But there's another type that's harder to spot and
Mm,
can even be common among high achieving and successful people, which you wouldn't have known in the 90s necessarily, and it's high
mhm,
functioning codependency. So, what this can look like is you're the person everyone comes to for help. You're reliable, capable, and you always have it together, at least on the surface. You can excel at work, you're there for your family and friends, and you pride yourself on being strong and independent. But underneath, you're exhausted and feel responsible for everyone else's emotions and may struggle to say no even when you're overwhelmed. And you may not even realize you have needs because you're so focused on meeting everyone else's. And I actually think that that picture really ties into anxiety and depression
mhm,
because it's stressful to try and be
mhm.
meeting everyone's needs, and the depression can come from not getting our own needs met, right? Um,
Yep.
so there are some myths that it only affects people in obviously dysfunctional relationships. That is not
Mhm,
true.
mhm,
That if you can function well in life, you don't have codependency issues. And the reality
Mm-hmm.
is that is also not true because you can function very well. That it's
Mm-hmm.
only about romantic relationships, also not true because it can show up at work, in friendships, with family, anywhere that you interact with people that you care about.
Yeah.
That it only applies to women. That is
Right.
also not true. So the core traits, just to recap, are overfunctioning, possibly people pleasing, difficulty setting boundaries and saying no, and having it take an emotional toll. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people are slow to realize that it's taking an emotional toll until they're pretty exhausted. So, Dr. Sapp, what are some
Yeah.
genes
Yeah.
that you think of immediately when you
Yeah.
think about that presentation?
Yeah, so I have studied like the genes like quite a bit over the years, and just I have like my algorithms for what supplements can help and everything. So, but I did take a look at the research in terms of some of the tie-ins, and slow COMT, I would have automatically thought that it may be associated with codependency. So just like to reference the sort of prior understanding, the codependency literature was more focused on people in dysfunctional relationships, like you said, or people who had relationships with people who are drug abusers or alcohol abusers or such. But slow comp, they tend to be overthinkers. So if you guys look at your genetic reports, you'll see that slow comp will be it'll be AA. That's the genotype. If you can see it there, it's the lowest COMT activity and the longest dopamine half-life. So basically, you're breaking down the neurotransmitters more slowly, including the stress neurotransmitters. So they're basically circulating and more active for a longer period of time. So dopamine and norepinephrine are more active. You're more likely to be anxious, and then you're more likely to overthink as a result. You also may tend to get stuck on things more easily, and it's also associated with OCD. Bipolar doesn't mean people who have slow comp have those disorders, but there are some associations there. So what I found is that there is an association between codependency and slow COMT. So basically, chronic overthinking can lead to caretaker roles, and it can also lead to focusing or even over focusing, like on particular individuals in your life, including pleasing those individuals and different kinds of people pleasing behavior, as well as rumination about how you can please those people and how you may not be living up to your own high expectations in your relationships. I can relate to this one. I have slow comped, kind of a recovering, high functioning codependent myself. So that's very interesting. I don't know about you if you have any genetic tie-ins for that one.
I also have a slow comp. So it's slow
Okay.
comp tonight
Oh,
here at the
there we go. Love it. Yeah, it's very interesting when you get to know people and share your genetic reports. The DNA company was a young company, we all kind of shared it just amongst each other, and the associations with temperament were very interesting. And I will reiterate that the life outcomes of different genetic types is a completely different manner. You can have any combination of these genes and still be successful and still be healthy. But it does predispose you to certain personality traits. So that's interesting. Um, should I jump into another gene and codependency, or did
do you
you?
we can do it that way, or if you want to talk about, do we want to talk about what can be done later? Just do all of that later on. Is that how we want to?
I can actually jump into some of the micronutrient strategies for if someone has slow comp, and then if you have some of the behavioral ones, that could be interesting too.
Sure. And I just want
Yeah.
to throw out there that even if you have a fast COMT, that doesn't mean that
Hmm.
you can't exhibit any of these tendencies because you may not notice how many people you're helping Because
Mm,
if you're clearing out these hormones, these neurotransmitters, rather quickly, it's sort of like, oh, on to the next thing. I can take that on. I can take that on. I can take that on, and not really noticing
mm,
necessarily that that you're doing that. So there's no, we're not saying that anyone is inferior to anyone else. There are pros and cons to every single um, thing that, and the way that they're managed can make them seem so. So somebody who is a worrier, they're also focused, and so they're noticing things, and there are benefits to that. And someone who
yeah.
can just move on to the next thing and help a billion people, they're really good helpers, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's this is not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily pathological unless it starts to impact the person in a negative way. So I just want to be really clear about that. It's when it gets
Yeah.
exaggerated. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And we should also reiterate that pretty much any of the genotypes could be prone to codependency. And then it also depends on the combination of the genes in terms of how they present. So we're not just trying to pigeonhole slow comp people or fast comp people because there are basically pros and cons to each variation that we're looking at. None of them are strictly pathological or pointing to a specific illness. So putting that out there and that fast commentary kind of made me think of a few people I know. I don't know if I don't know their genes. But sometimes you can kind of speculate if you studied it long enough. But there are those people that are just kind of like on the go all the time, like a typical fast comp person, constantly transitioning, constantly multitasking. They're the warriors, we call them, the fast comp people. And often those people too are prone to burnout because they don't get the same signals necessarily early on. So that's a really good point. And behaviorally, is there anything you'd want to kind of add in there?
Yeah, so I think
Hmm.
for more for the slow comped people, that it's important to remember that emotions really only stay in the body for a few seconds unless our thoughts keep them going. So while I would never advise anyone to stifle or ignore their feelings, being aware of how your body responds to stressful emotions gives you an opportunity to consciously choose when to keep thinking about stressful or upsetting things. And if you find out that you can't stop the thoughts, to look for techniques that help you do that, like
Mm,
mindfulness, um, exercise, and especially outside, looking around at different things. There are and seeking help from people who know how to teach you techniques that can help you to calm the body down. Various breathing techniques. Box breathing is one that I really love, to help regulate your nervous system so that you can clear things out more quickly. Whereas if you're
hmm.
more of a fast calmed person, it would be more like practices that build reserves for the long haul.
Hmm.
Paying attention to yourself, consistent sleep schedules, remembering to slow down and tune into yourself, and learning to say no before you reach burnout, not
Yeah.
after you have reached burnout and don't want to help anybody ever again. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Those are good tips. Yeah, I really like diaphragmatic breathing as well. I
mhm.
mean, it's so close to box breathing, but that whole like abdominal distension, like letting your stomach kind of like balloon out and then exhaling and kind of going through cycles like that. I find that within 5 minutes even, it can shift my state. So yeah, and then COMT, I do have some supplements because a lot of our audience are biohackers or supplementers, and so they're kind of interested. So for slow COMT, some of them that have been studied or shown to help are B vitamins, magnesium, rhodiola, and theanine. So for the B vitamins, we do kind of caution people. I even caution people in my clinical practice to get the right form of B vitamin. You might not have the information. If you don't have your genetic information, sometimes veering towards the hypoallergenic is a good idea, especially if you consider yourself a sensitive individual, as in someone who's sensitive to supplements, medications, different, you know. external factors or nutritional factors. So adenosine hydroxy is really well tolerated, adenosine B12, hydroxy B12. And then some people benefit from the methylated, but you can also get into overmethylation if you're taking those regularly, if you don't have the right genes. So that would be something to look into in your methylation report. I don't know if you have like a specific combination that you'd like to reference, Dr. Steady, for which B vitamins to take. I have found that the more variations you have in your methylation report, if you did get that, the more likely you are to be one of those people who gets a negative reaction from too many methylated B vitamins. And then also if you're prone to any mental health conditions or hypersensitivity, you're more likely as well. So um, for fast COMT, some that slow down COMT a little bit are quercetin and EGCG. And then I also have L-tyrosine and luteolin because L-tyrosine can help dopamine, epinephrine or norepinephrine. And if you have fast COMT, you might be just burning through it a little too quickly for optimal. So yeah. So that's about that for COMT. That was a lot of COMT. uh,
And
yeah.
we definitely recommend that you talk to someone who can look at all of your genes with you and someone like Dr. Sapp or someone at the DNA company because it's a more complicated picture than any one gene. And
Yeah.
while everything that Dr. Sapp is saying is wonderful, and I completely agree with it, um, it I think that being able to understand the full picture of the genes is really helpful when deciding about supplements, as well as if you're on any medications or have any health issues. So, while this is all perfect and wonderful information, just keep in mind that we don't have your health history in front of us, so we can't necessarily speak to your particular situation during this webinar.
Yeah, no, 100%. And yeah, I can think of a lot of examples of that. Like, for example, if you have low dopamine binding, which I do, but then you have slow COMT, you might not actually have the best focus all the time. So you get these odd combinations with people sometimes, and you kind of have to put it in perspective, right? They all kind of affect each other to form a picture. And then also, environment is sometimes, it depends on the individual. Sometimes environment's an even bigger factor than the genes, you know? If someone had like a very stable upbringing and just sort of a more stable life and they had a lot of variations, they might not express themselves. I've also talked to other individuals where it was the opposite, where they had like perfect, quote unquote, they had like an almost perfect or optimal cognitive profile, but yet they had a lot of mental health and addiction issues. And that was due to environmental factors. So it can go either way.
100%. So you very nicely led us into another gene that maybe we want to talk about, DRD2. Um,
Yeah, dopamine binding. Yeah. So the slow one, well, it's not exactly slow. It means that you're not binding. Your dopamine receptors are not as sensitive. So they're not binding and transporting adequately. So if you have either what's considered optimal is high dopamine response, which is like GG. But if you have the GA or the AA, that's kind of considered more suboptimal. The slow dopamine binding or the low dopamine binding, that's where there could be issues with attention, there could be issues with low mood, there could be issues with addiction. It kind of plays out differently in everyone, and there could be none if someone had a perfect environment, for example. And some of the supplements that I have are tyrosine, because that helps dopamine, EGCG, luteolin, and SAMe. And SAMe will also help your methylation. I've seen it to be really helpful in higher doses for depression. But just like the B vitamins, you have to be careful when you're dosing because you don't want to overdo it. And then I guess we should touch on sort of the codependency tie-in there. So
Right.
there's also a tie-in there where reduced, so I was just born to be a codependent, apparently, according to this research here. So reduced DRD2 receptor densities correlated with seeking approval. So if you have that low density, low dopamine binding version, it's correlated with seeking approval behaviors, which is key in codependency. So there's a research paper on this specific one. And low dopamine too is considered a reward seeking variation. And studies show that individuals are less able to self-generate feelings of reward, needing validation from others. Um, if they have those variations. So it's almost the opposite of the slow COMT, where like with slow COMT, you could have higher dopamine because your neurotransmitters are sitting around for longer in the synapses. But then you also, even though dopamine makes us feel good, it also converts to epinephrine, which can stress us out. So there's like a double-edged sword to each of these. But if you have the low dopamine, you may be more prone to reward-seeking behavior and seeking approval from others. So I touched on the supplements there. I don't know if you have any kind of recommendations for optimizing your dopamine or just behavioral stuff that could help with that one.
Yeah, and so I think the higher density of receptors, they can function a lot more like the fast COMT, with just
Mm-hmm.
being like, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it, and not really noticing, uh, not stopping to notice as much as the low receptor who might person who might need to keep re-engaging with people, and in order to um, feel sort of indispensable, I guess, in a
Mm-hmm.
way. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so in terms of like practical things, if you have low receptor density, celebrating small wins, acknowledging your own accomplishments before looking for external validation, engaging in activities you find intrinsically rewarding, and not just helpful to others. So, really kind of turning that lens back inward. Practice giving yourself the appreciation you usually need from others, and even making lists of what you've accomplished, before deciding to help someone else. And then check in and see, do I need, like, do I want to help this person? Do they really need me to help them? Because of course it's great to help people, and it's actually can is one of the things that can relieve stress, is actually to help another person can be helpful. But just like anything, if you go too far in one direction, it can become not resourceful, is what we like to say in the business. So just really having some of the reward come from self, I think, is what I would suggest.
That's really good. I think I'm gonna have to set up a consult with Dr. Steady here. That's really good. Taking notes. All right, awesome. So that's the low dopamine, but also the high dopamine people. No one's immune here, but it kind of presents in different ways. So the next gene we could touch on is ADRA2B, and that's a really interesting one. Um, for the suboptimal variation of that one, I can look at the exact alleles. It would be the DD variation. And that's associated with decreased desensitization. So basically, more sensitization, double negative there. Um, and those individuals have been shown to be sometimes more empathic. Sometimes they might even be considered empaths or highly sensitive individuals, or there's a lot of associations there with that type. And the single allele, so even the ID tends to be associated with, being a highly sensitive person or an empath or just having more emotional imprinting and stronger memories of negative events. So I also have this one suboptimal. So again, born to be a codependent, apparently. So here we are. The deletion variant, so that would be the double DD. That one is associated with strong emotional memories. And then even the ID is also associated with more increased memory of negative events. So these people would be more prone to PTSD. I mean, it also ties in with the COMT gene though. So if you had slow COMT and suboptimal here, that would kind of amplify the effect. So you kind of have to look at the genes in combination. That's why a genomic consult would be a great idea to fully understand your individual picture. And for those people, the IDs or the DDs, they may have heightened rejection sensitivity, which could reinforce overfunctioning and caretaking behaviors. Um, Before I get into some of the supplements that can help with that one, do you have any sort of behavioral recommendations for either the more sensitized ADRA2B people or even how the regular optimal version might be at risk?
Yes, before I do that, I just want to go a little bit more into the rejection thing because I think that
Mm-hmm.
this can be an example. It's just one example, but of how anxiety can be a result of some of these things because you could just substitute rejection for anything that happened to you that um, felt so uncomfortable or maybe happened more than once that you started to get a little hypervigilant around it. So these things kind of get burned in your memory, like Dr. Sapp was saying, and you can develop hypervigilance. And so with rejection, it would be around other people's emotions. So you become really skilled at reading the room and
Mm-hmm.
anticipating needs and
Mm-hmm.
avoiding conflict. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just to experience so that you can avoid experiencing rejection pain again. And so
Mm-hmm.
what I know about anxiety is not wanting to experience it again holds people back from doing certain things. And so the anxiety can manifest even before doing the thing, and then it can manifest the entire time that they're doing the thing. This can also sometimes lead to perfectionism, which isn't just about high standards. It can be about avoiding the emotional intensity of disappointment that your brain
Mm-hmm.
encodes so strongly. So this is
Mm-hmm.
why when people say, oh, who cares what they think? For some people, they kind of have a bigger struggle with not caring what people think because their brain is more wired to experience social rejection or whatever the thing is that they've been experiencing than another person. And knowing that doesn't mean that it has to be that way forever, but acknowledging that there can be a biological basis for it, I think
Mm-hmm.
also is somewhat empowering because it can help people to not feel like there's something wrong with them. It's like, oh, I am actually more sensitive than other people to rejection or to whatever the thing is, right? Um,
Yeah.
and it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you can't get help and move past it in many cases. It's just that kindness to self, I think, goes a really long way. And being able to say to other people, hey, I have the genetics that make things like rejection seem like a bigger deal to me. Also, having a biological basis for some reason makes it seem more acceptable. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, so in terms of doing things, if you're more of an emotional imprinter, practices that help process intense emotions without being overwhelmed, more body-based practices like yoga or breath work, EMDR, but trauma-informed therapies, and
Mm-hmm.
creating positive emotional memories to balance out those negative ones because you
Mm-hmm.
can do that as well. So just trying to, not necessarily about the same situation, but in general in your life, being really present with the really good things and kind
Mm-hmm.
of trying to hold on to them a little bit um, is really.
That's really good. Those are some great tips, Dr. Steady. Yeah, appreciate that. So for the supplements, I just have three supplements that I wanted to add here that can be helpful. Ginseng, rhodiola, and theanine. So a lot of these in our kind of original algorithm were based on studies, some of them based on clinical observation, but most of them based on studies. So um, yeah, not necessarily. Some of them are based on the specific gene, others are based on the manifestation of that gene, and then supplements that help with that. So if that makes sense. Um, yeah, so Other than the emotional imprinter, and those were some great, so body-based practices, kindness to self, trauma-informed therapy, and then positive emotional memories. That was really interesting. So I know there's, research that our brains tend to focus on, negative thoughts and negative loops. And for those with a suboptimal ADRA2B, likely even more so. Um, so is there anything specific or any specific research that you got that one from? Because I really like that recommendation.
That's more from an NLP standpoint where we
Okay.
do something called, now I'm going to forget what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, oh my goodness. Come back to it because the
Yeah.
word, this time of night, sometimes
NLP
words
and
just neurolinguistic programming.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
we, oh my goodness. I
She's
can't
on
believe,
the East Coast. It's night. I mean, totally understandable. See, here I am mid-afternoon. I have an advantage automatically.
right. It's
Us
mid-afternoon
on
for
the
you.
Pacific Coast, we're just like smooth sailing at 3:41 p.m. Anyways, okay, so yeah, that's based on NLP, which is really interesting. It's about like reprogramming unconscious associations. I've done a bit of it myself. It's pretty cool. So interesting. All right. And then the moving along to serotonin gene. So one that's really interesting is the 5-HTT-LPR. And then for those of you that are following along with your report, the suboptimal or most suboptimal would be the SS. So it's associated with decreased expression of the serotonin transporter with dysregulated serotonin secretion and reuptake. And then interestingly, a lot of people associate, low serotonin with, oh, SSRIs, maybe, kind of one of the foundational mental health treatments would be helpful. But those with the most suboptimal variation often are poor responders to SSRIs. So it doesn't always directly correlate with like the sort of physiological difference. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm speaking in code. But those with LS or SS, those are considered the ones where they may have trouble with serotonin. And there are some links to anxiety, depression, and codependency. So basically, the short allele, so those are the SS, even if they only have one, have higher emotional sensitivity. So again, guilty. I have all the problems. There's a and they are sensitive to social harmony. So this has actually been studied. So those with the short allele have more emotional sensitivity on average. So this also depends on your other genes as well, but this one's associated with that. And the implication in codependency is that codependency thrives when conflict avoidant trumps boundary setting. So some of those people, because they're so sensitive to interpersonal conflicts and interpersonal harmony, they may be more likely to be conflict avoiding, even if it's at the expense of their own personal boundaries. And as many of us have learned in recent years, personal boundaries are very foundational to our well-being. And our mental well-being tends to spill over into our physical well-being as well. So that one has been studied there. So that would be both the LS and the SS. I'm sure that there's ways that the LL, even if you have optimal serotonin transport based on this gene, could be also more prone to codependency as well. Um, for that one, again, I have a couple supplements that help. So if you have the suboptimal version, you might think, if you're considering a medication, if you are experiencing anxiety and depression, you might think, oh, maybe, one of the classics like fluoxetine or Prozac or other kinds of SSRIs. But turns out there's actually an association. You may not respond as well. So B6 is one that can help. B12 is another that can help, including the methylated B12 if you're an under methylator, so if you have slow methylation, or 5-HTP, which can help your serotonin production in kind of a more gentle way than an SSRI. Tryptophan too, I mean, I added that one in, but that can be helpful as well for serotonin. So I don't know if you have any like sort of comment or lifestyle hacks. You have a lot of those, and yeah.
Um, so consistent routines and social support that doesn't feel like social obligation. Um, and just to kind of go over some, you mentioned boundaries, and there are some specific things that are really helpful for high functioning codependency, and boundaries is one of them. And thinking of boundaries as self-care, reframing this from being selfish, which I think even if
Hmm.
that didn't originate in us, that may be a message that we got as children or teenagers or something like that, that it was more appropriate to care about other people's feelings than our own. And if you didn't, if you said no, if you didn't take care of someone else first, you were being selfish. And if you can kind of reframe that to taking care of your body, taking care of your needs first, almost like that, the whole thing with the airplane and the mask, always put your own on first. That there's really a reason for that. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
so when you say no to overfunctioning, you're not actually abandoning anyone, but you're also not self-abandoning anymore.
Yeah.
And,
Hmm.
I kind of feel like we're given ourselves, our bodies and our minds and our spirits, if one believes in that sort of thing,
Yeah.
um, and that's our primary person to take care of. It's not really anybody else's job. And so if we don't do that first because we're taking care of other people, then who's taking care of us, right? We're not doing our primary job. Um, also, not rewriting people pleasing scripts in our heads. Things
Hmm.
like I have to make everyone happy, or I'm responsible for other people's feelings, or if I don't do it, it won't get done right. I feel
Yeah.
kind of called out by myself on that one. Remembering that other people are capable of solving their own problems. They
Hmm.
actually can do it. Um,
Yeah.
and rest, receiving, and self-compassion. And if your brain chemistry makes you more sensitive to stress, rejection, or requires more reward satisfaction, then self-care isn't selfish, it's strategic. And the only way to be able to help yourself and others in a sustainable way is to do this self-care. So,
Yeah.
I kind of went off on a little tangent there,
No,
but I
that's
wanted to
good.
just put all of that out there.
That's really good. I mean, I think that most of us can't get enough reminders about self-care. I don't know about you. I'm finding, I mean, I know that was the case when I was in Canada in medical school, like everybody reached the point where it wasn't optional. It was like do or die. And so we all learned self-care. But and I am finding in the US even more so, people are so busy, so the demands are so high that it isn't really optional when it comes to preventing chronic illness. Just as a really concrete example, I see a lot of women, especially late 30s, 40s, 50s, with bottomed out cortisol. Often happens at a similar time to the bottomed out hormones, but it's also partly from just overdoing it for so many years. So something's got to give at a certain point, and if we can have those kind of self-preservation boundaries in place, it's gonna pay off over time. And in the short term, will be more fun to be around. Less irritable, less resentful, less overworked when we kind of know our own boundaries. So that's really good. So yeah, the next one I wanted to talk about, this is a really cool gene. It's gotten a lot of interest and a lot of studies, BDNF. So I found through doing genomic reports, there were not as many people that had this one suboptimal. I'm not sure if you found that as well. That's more just anecdotal. Um, But if you do have it suboptimal, it would make you more prone to concussions. It's associated with suboptimal production of brain-derived neurotropic factor, which helps your neuroplasticity. So that means like it helps your brain recover from either physical or emotional trauma. So those with less BDNF or the genetic variations for less BDNF, like the GA or the AA, have to do extra self-care for producing BDNF. So some of the things are infrared sauna has been shown to increase it, sunlight exposure, cardiovascular exercise, and a supplement is green coffee fruit extract, has been shown to help there. I have a couple other supplements too. Theanine, EGCG, which is from green tea, NAC, and mag 3 and 8. So in terms of how BDNF is correlated with anxiety or codependency, um, there's a study showing that people with the Val 6,6 Met, so correct me if I'm wrong, is that the lowest production of BDNF, the AA?
I believe that's AA.
Okay. Um, they have difficulty changing behavioral patterns. So those people may have maybe more prone to high functioning codependency, and they may persist in those caretaking behaviors despite wanting to change. Because changing habits, changing routines is a bit harder for them since their brain isn't quite as plastic or it needs more support in being plastic. They may get stuck in overgiving, as one example, because their brains might be a little less adaptable to new habits. Um, so I don't know if you have any other gems of recommendations there, Dr. Steady, that might relate to that behavior or gene.
Um, Being patient with oneself and maybe not trying to change everything all at once, right? So if you're less able to do that biologically, pick one relationship or one behavior. I don't want to I'm trying to think of something. Now, of course, I can't think of any of my previous codependent behaviors. But anyway, one behavior,
Morning routine.
right, that you either want to do for yourself or you want to stop doing for other people.
Mhm.
And do that every morning if it's for yourself or every afternoon or whatever works for you, or have that be the only thing that you're focusing on. Instead of trying to change everything about who you are and how you interact with people all at once, and doing some of the things to get some of that BDNF going in your brain, like Dr. Sapp was talking about. But really, the patience with self um, and taking things slowly, I think, is a really good thing to do. I also found for my for thinking a lot and not being able to let go of that. I mean, I did a lot of meditation for a long time. But neurofeedback was actually also something that really helped me to um, make a leap in terms of my ability to meditate for extended periods of time to really get myself quiet. And that
Mhm.
that was those both of those things were really helpful for me. As hard as it sounds for someone who can't stop thinking, to think about meditating. Meditation doesn't have to be just sitting there and being silent. It's more about focusing on something else other than the thoughts and just letting them kind of move through instead of sticking around and being something that I have to think about that because it came through my brain. It's like, no,
Mhm. Mhm.
it's moving along like a cloud in the sky, and now I'm going to come back to whatever it is that I'm doing, painting or meditating or taking a walk, whatever that thing is.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, neurofeedback is awesome. And I've done it myself as well and seen like really big benefits there. Everybody kind of has like a different brainwave imprint. So if you find like the right protocol for yours, for me, my brain was just like overactive. So I needed to kind of slow it down more into like a low beta. And it really helps. And there's a bunch of at-home programs as well, so you don't have to necessarily go into the office for like an hour every week for a long time. So that's brought down the cost too. So I would totally back that, not just for people who have BDNF issues, but pretty much it can be used for anxiety, depression, ADHD. There's lots of research, even cognitive decline and dementia. So take a look if you're interested. Um, and then I guess the only two genes that we didn't necessarily touch on specifically were one of them's the MAO. So the MAO has some similarities to COMT, in that it helps break down neurotransmitters, especially dopamine. Did you have any specific recommendations for those with fast MAO or slow MAO? Because I think a lot of them overlap with a fast COMT or slow COMT.
Yes, I
Yeah,
would
and you
say the
would
same
second that.
thing. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So we talked about a number of supplements there, which are more specifically for speeding up the breakdown of neurotransmitters or slowing it down. So some of the ones for speeding it up would be B vitamins, magnesium, rhodiola. That was when it came to COMT. And then when it came to fast COMT, EGCG, quercetin, luteolin, L-tyrosine. And some of the behavioral stuff when we talked about COMT. Um, I'm not sure I remember your specific recommendation. I know it was good.
Um, so for a slower one, it was stress relief practices and just being aware of emotions and thoughts and the relationship between those two things.
Okay.
And if it was fast, it was for uh, sleep schedules and remembering to slow down and tune into self and learning to say no before you reach burnout, not after.
Okay.
So similar
Perfect.
things could apply. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would apply also to slow MAO and fast MAO, just for the audience. So before we get into some of the questions, so it looks like we have a couple already. Did you want to wrap up with saying anything kind of encouraging for our audience when it comes to their genetic results, or just hope for future practices or implementation?
Yeah, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, um, if we think of our genes like the blueprint for a house, and they show you the basic structure that you're working with, you wouldn't necessarily build a house the same way next to the ocean in a hurricane-prone area as you would someplace in the woods that gets 10 feet of snow. Um, Neither of those is a bad place to live. I mean, I know where I would rather live, but some people would rather live in the place that I wouldn't. They just
Yeah.
require different approaches to building them.
Mm,
So one might be
yeah.
on stilts, one might need a lot more insulation from the weather, things like that. And we don't judge those two houses as one is better and one is worse. And so if we can think of people's genetic material, if your blueprint shows you're more sensitive to stress or need more reward satisfaction or something like that, um, it's not a flaw that you need to
Mm-hmm.
fix. It's just
Mm-hmm.
information, and some questions you can ask yourself are like, what does my body need right now? What would honoring both my genetics and my boundaries look like in this situation? And really being curious about ourselves, I think, instead of being in a place of judgment, can really be helpful in all of these situations. So that's my
That's so
spiel.
good, Dr. Steady. You're so wise. She's taught me a lot right now, so I hope the audience is taking notes too.
Well,
Uh,
likewise, Dr. Sapp.
well, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, I would just say, I mean, I know that when I got my genetic results back, especially for my cognitive and mental health, it took a little bit of processing. Um, but I would just reiterate the fact that none of these variations are diagnostic or pathological. They're just variations. So they all have pros and cons. Some of them are considered more optimal because they are associated with more balance, essentially. So all it means is that if you have a variation that's higher or lower, like fast comped or slow comped, you just have to do a little more work to bring you into balance. Um, and people can be successful and mentally healthy with any combination of these. So through doing genomic consults, through talking amongst colleagues, I've seen almost every kind of variation be workable. So it's just a matter of, like you said, not forcing a round peg in a square hole. Is that the expression? You have to work with what you've got, and there's a lot that you can do to optimize your expression of any of these genetic variations. So for me, it was life-changing. I don't currently have any financial incentive. I would encourage anyone here to get, their genetic test done for their mental health if they haven't already, because I do find it very helpful in just understanding yourself and then even implementing protocols, because you have more options when you look at your genes. Like, is it psychotherapy? Is it medication? Is it supplements? Is it lifestyle? What specific recommendations are best for you? So I will jump into some of the questions, and I
I have
saw.
two quick things to say
Okay, yeah,
first, if that's
yeah,
okay. One
yeah.
is I thought of the name of that technique. It's
Okay,
anchoring. Anchoring.
anchoring.
That's the one.
Okay, awesome. Okay,
And the other thing is that if medication is the route that you're considering, that I would also recommend the PGX test to see which medications might work
right.
better or not as well for you.
Yeah.
Because going into an appointment knowing that
Mm-hmm.
is also really empowering because sometimes people try one after the other,
Mm-hmm.
and it can really narrow down the number of medications that you might have to try before finding one that works for you and has the fewest side effects possible. So I just wanted to also throw out that test
Yeah.
as another really good option when dealing with mental health.
That's really good. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I wish those existed when I was like a teenager back in the day in Montreal. Like I got put on an SSRI, and it turns out my genes don't like those at all. So it's really helpful to know how your body metabolizes different drugs. Like I would 100% say that. And the other thing I would say is there's actually a lot of micronutrient therapies that are very effective. So consider the supplements as well. Um, so if you're working with a trained practitioner in mental health who understands it, that is, because experimenting with supplements on your own can be kind of daunting, not to mention there's a lot of them on the market that aren't great. Um, let's jump into some of the questions. This one caught my eye right away because I get this question a lot in my clinical work. What would overmethylation look like? Methylcobalamin works on nerve problems that B12 deficiency can cause and seems to be good for those with resultant neuropathy. So, yes. So, for people that are overmethylating, some of the most common symptoms, let's say you're taking a dose of B12 and it's methyl B12 and the dose is just too high for you, or you've been on it for too long, your blood levels may shoot up. You can typically go quite a bit above the reference range and it still be safe, but you might have symptoms like agitation, anxiety, migraines, so sometimes even neuropathy. So those are some of the common manifestations or ways that overmethylation could present. So headaches, agitation, anxiety, those are some of the common ones. And then one way to, if you're still low or not optimal in B12, is if you consider an adenosyl B12 or a hydroxy B12 or even cyanocobalamin, you are less likely to experience that. I personally haven't seen any cases of a poor response to adenosyl hydroxy. I know that is also possible, but that's kind of my preferred hypoallergenic form of B12. And then you may want to look at your blood levels at some point too, because if you have really high B12, you could potentially take a break also. So, That's just one thing. And then how do you know? I'll let you, I'll let you go, Dr. Steady, for the next one.
Uh, the next question is, how do you know if you are a slow or fast methylator? So when we're talking about slow and fast, we're talking about COMT and MAO, which we mentioned, and those will be in your reports. But then there are more genes that are involved in methylation, right? We have
Mm-hmm.
MTHFR, SHMT1, MTR, and MTRR. So did I forget any?
I have
Oh yeah, yeah.
FUT2, MTHFR, SHMT1, MTR, and MTRR, and then two strains or two locations of MTHFR.
HFR.
So yeah.
So I know we just said those really fast. So while Dr. Sapp is answering the next question, I'm going to put them in the chat so that
Mm-hmm.
you can look them up in your report. Um, and they show up in multiple reports, but you can
Mm-hmm.
definitely look at them in the methylation and detoxification sections of your report. So I'm going to do that now while Dr. Sapp
Mm-hmm.
answers the next one.
And then the other thing is in terms of methylation, other than your genes, um, you can get different reports, like through urinary reports, for example, like through Dutch, where they will tell you like actively whether you're over-methylating or under-methylating. So there is a difference between your genetic blueprint and what you're currently demonstrating. Um, and so even if you're prone to being a slow methylator because you have suboptimal methylation genes, or you have an MTHFR mutation, that doesn't prevent you from switching from undermethylation to overmethylation. So sometimes that can be even more common because if you're not efficient at the methylation cycle, which lowers inflammation in your body, you may actually have more methyl groups circulating in your cells, which can cause those symptoms like headaches and anxiety and over methylation. If you're under methylating, just in terms of the way it looks clinically, sometimes it could be things like depression or sluggishness. Those are kind of some of I don't know if you have any other examples of under methylating, um, Dr. Tracy.
To be perfectly honest with you, because I was typing into the chat, I
Yeah,
could not
no
hear what you
worries.
were saying.
No worries.
I know
Yeah.
you've got it. I know you had it
Yeah, yeah, no,
100%.
I was just giving some examples of how do you know if you are a slow or fast methylator? Then I was referencing the methylation genes, but then also saying that there's some urinary tests like Dutch that can tell
Hmm.
you if you're fast or slow currently. So
Right.
it's your genes are the kind of blueprint, but then how you're currently presenting is something else, and that can change. And so even if you're a slow methylator, you could tip into being an over methylator depending on your supplementation or your environment. And then I was answering kind of what slow methylation might look like from a clinical perspective using depression and sluggishness as one example. Even OCD, I think, is associated a little more with slow than fast. So the fast is kind of easy. It's like anxiety and agitation and headaches. It's like everything's in overdrive. And the slow is in underdrive. So depression and sluggishness and stuff like that, if that helps conceptualize it. Um, so yeah, another question, no mention of ashwagandha. So ashwagandha is a really well-studied adaptogen. So we could just easily put that in terms of some of the genes that predispose you to anxiety and stress, you may benefit also from ashwagandha. So let's say you have Adra2B, where you have the more sensitive version of that. Instead of just ginseng and rhodiola, you could probably consider ashwagandha. I don't know if it's actually studied in relation to that gene, but it's a good adaptogen for a lot of people. So it would be worth experimenting with a quality ashwagandha. Yeah.
Um, sometimes people can have, and this isn't frequently that this happens, more of a paradoxical response to adaptogenic things where
Mm-hmm.
they might feel just totally wired and feel more stressed out. And ashwagandha is also one that can also make people feel like they don't have the same sense of joy in their everyday activities that they used to. So just um, I would recommend once again doing supplementation under the supervision of a practitioner who will then notice if you're
Mm-hmm.
feeling that way and be like, I wonder if that has anything to do with the ashwagandha. And once again, it's not tremendously common, but it's
Yeah.
just something that I always like to mention because sometimes people just start taking things and they're adding things and they're adding things and they're adding things and they don't always notice when something shifts like that and they may think that it's more
Yeah.
situational than
Right.
not. So,
That's a really good example. Yeah, for any of these supplements, I mean, paradoxical reactions are possible. So it is often a good idea with something that's like having a direct biochemical effect on you to do one at a time. I always recommend, like, especially for my sensitive patients, start everything at least 3 to 4 days apart, if not a week apart. You just to gauge how something is agreeing with you or not agreeing with you. The next question I want to jump into because I love this herb, holy basil, holy basil, holy basil, holy basil. It's also known as tulsi. I think there's Tulsi for the Ayurvedic, there's Holy Basil, and then there's the Latin name, which I'm blanking on. All these herbs have multiple names, so it's hard to keep track sometimes. But that's a really good adaptogen. It's been shown to lower cortisol. It's also an antifungal, if anyone here has struggled with mold toxicity or anything like that. Um, Really good for stress. Some people find it more uplifting than others. I have heard it tends to be more of an uplifting adaptogen. So some of them are more energizing. They all have different kind of personalities, but I have come across some people with a paradoxical response where they get sleepy from it. For me, it's more of a morning or afternoon supplement, and I love it in tea form. Um, and it doesn't necessarily, so it's an adaptogen for the category. I mean, I would say it would be applicable to lots of different gene variations here where you might be more prone to stress and anxiety. I don't know if you have any other comments on that one, Dr.
no,
Tracy.
nope, I think you
Okay,
covered it very, very well. Um,
okay.
So we have a question in the chat where someone's describing how they feel this heavy burden to help or fix a person's problem and how they feel about that. And I'm hoping that you typed the question in fairly early in our webinar, and so I'm hoping that you got some good tips from both Dr. Sapp and myself. So I'm not going to go through everything that we said already, but if you feel like you need further help. I know that Dr. Gutierrez is in the chat. She has put her email in there. Maybe she'll put it in there again. And you can see about talking to someone from the team who can help you in a more uh, individual way about you yourself. You know, the advice that we're giving tonight is more general. And for your specific situation, we would need to know more about you, quite frankly, in order to give more recommendations than the ones that we've already given. But thank you very much for asking.
And in terms of Courtney's question, I actually love that question. Pretty specific, but does caffeine or other stimulants have an effect on methylation and neurotransmitter levels? The answer is definitely yes. So just as one kind of example, EGCG, which is in green tea, if you have fast COMT, that can actually help to slow it down a little and kind of balance it out. Um, if you have slow calmed green tea, depending on the dose, you're probably fine with 1 cup, but higher doses of EGCG or green tea can slow it down a bit further, which could actually be uncomfortable depending on the green tea to theanine ratio, because theanine will calm you down. But some people with slow COMT, and there's some research on this, yerba mate has been shown to speed up COMT a little bit. So if you have slow COMT, I know yerba mate has definitely agreed with me. Um, then there's coffee. I mean, coffee will increase your dopamine for sure, and then your norepinephrine. So if you have slow COMT, you might want to be careful with how much caffeine you consume. There's a bunch of other genes where you might want to be careful too. We also have your caffeine metabolism with a CYP1A2, I believe it is. So that's a factor there that plays in to your neurotransmitters. So if you're more prone to an anxiety response or an exaggerated anxiety response, consider green tea or yerba mate or going caffeine free if things are bad enough. For me, that would take an extreme situation, but um, and so yeah, stimulants. I mean, there's also stimulant medications, and those would interact with these genes as well. Um, you know, so that would be a whole other topic. Those tend to increase dopamine and norepinephrine. So, depending on your dopamine binding, you want to look at the interaction there. So it actually could be very useful with almost every type of caffeine or stimulant to know what your neurotransmitter genes are. And hopefully that answers your question, generally speaking. Um, does everyone have either a fast or slow COMT, or is there a normal? There is actually a middle COMT that like almost half the population has. I don't know the exact percentage. Um, so that COMT will interplay with all the other genes, but the middle one is generally considered the most balanced one. So lucky you if you have the normal COMT. The rest of us just have to work a little bit harder. I don't know if you know anything about the epistatic studies showing problems if one has the GG versions of both BDNF and TPH2.
Dr. Kosterman just went over this on a different
Mm,
webinar, and I'm trying to remember both what she said and which webinar it was so that I can direct this person to that webinar. It's funny because I almost, yeah, the name's familiar.
okay.
Anyway, so I will look into this and
Thank
figure
you.
out how to communicate that information to you because it is almost 7:30 my time and I'm an early to
Mhm.
bed person, so my brain just is having a little bit of trouble with the recall of the information at this moment.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that question, but that concludes our question. So thank you so much to the audience for tuning in. Thank you so much, Dr. Tracy. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like she just gave us some gold nuggets of wisdom there for every different type of genetic variation, and also just anxiety, depression, and codependency. Um, and I guess one of my takeaways is just that again, not to overstate it, but every genetic variation has its place, right? There's a reason why these variations occur in nature, even if sometimes we're referring to them as mutations, these are just variations. And they all have positives, pros and cons associated with them. Um, if you have the suboptimal ADRA2B, you may be more empathic. If you have the low dopamine, you may be more of a risk taker. You may be more bold. If you have the slow COMT, you may be more conscientious. So every variation has its positives. Um, and really, everyone has the possibility with any of these to be successful and be healthy in body and mind. So that's kind of my biggest takeaway.
And one of mine was, Dr. Sapp, how big of a difference things like micronutrients can make in someone's mental health journey in terms of
Yeah.
giving their genes what they need, in terms of, you know, what is or isn't in our food anymore, and just the
Mm-hmm.
individual variation in how those things are processed and the power that those can have on people's mood regulation, and the work that you're doing around that, I think is super awesome and fascinating. So thank you so much for being with us this evening. Thank you, audience. And we will see you all next time.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Dr. Tracy, and our audience, seconding everything you just said, and hope everyone has a wonderful and restful evening of self-care ahead. All right. Take care.